one last session of the day. You are the diehards. You are the ones who have been with us much of the day, I think. I'm delighted to be here to just have a chance to quick reflect on the day before we all head out and leave for the weekend and do whatever we're going to do. This is a chance, one final chance to reflect on all these things we've had to talk about today. From the start, where we were talking about, how do you get your first 10, 100,000 paid subscribers? And then we talked about how do you juggle all of the different things you have to juggle, do 25 things in 24 hours, and then spoke over lunch about confronting the plateaus that we inevitably face and the feelings of being stuck at various times in our journey. And then concluding with the session Ambreen just led so deftly on collaboration and how we can work together with others in various different ways. So I've been extremely excited today to learn so many things. I hope it's been fruitful for you. I'm curious, as we get going here in this final session, if everyone would chime in on this poll, which is about what your next step, one of your next steps might be coming away from this. You can pick as many as you want, so you might have several next steps, but encourage you to pick at least one thing and to make an internal commitment or set an intention for yourself. I think we need to continue giving people a little bit more time for that. Maybe we'll reset and relaunch that. Let's give you a little bit more time. Sorry, let's try that again. So I'll give you a minute to respond. And it could be something that you're going to request feedback on for ideas. It could be you're going to email a potential collaborator. It could be brainstorming in some new way or some new thing that you want to work on. Give yourself a break. We talked about that with Tanmoy and Pam, and that came up at various times in the day. Or something else not listed here, and you can share that in the chat if there's some other next step that you have based on something that someone said, some insight that you heard. So we'll wrap up the poll in about 5, 4, 3, 2, 1, and I'll share what you're all saying. And it looks like some people are going to do some brainstorming. That's about 2/5. Almost half are going to take a true break. Maybe that's because it's a Friday and you have the weekend ahead, which makes total sense. Hopefully everyone gets a chance to have a restorative break. And some people, 1/3 of you, are going to ask for feedback on one of your projects, or 1/4 of you are going to email a new collaborator. So I'm glad everyone has some kind of intention coming out of this day so far. And I want to invite up my colleagues here, Krystal and Ambreen, who have done the amazing work of creating these 6 case studies and also hosting 2 of these sessions today and helping all this come together so expertly. So first of all, kudos for the work that you've done. I'm really eager to hear your thoughts on some final takeaways. Before we jump into our own takeaways, I'd love to invite everyone here to share one thing, one in the chat. So the chat is a great space. And one of the nice things about Zoom, one of the not nice things is we can't actually see each other. We're in all different rooms and separated. But one of the nice things is that we all can share this chat space together and share our insights. So it's not just us few here up here on the virtual stage, but it's all of you sharing your insights and takeaways from today as well. So please do take a moment as we're beginning here and share one thing, one insight, one thought, one quote, one comment, one idea that you heard thus far today that might be something that would resonate with others in the room, might be a helpful reminder of something that came out. And then I'm going to invite my colleagues here also to help us kind of walk through the day in a lightning fashion in our final moments here before we all wrap up for the weekend. So I see a lot of insights being shared in the chat about today. Please keep adding thoughts, something that you're taking away. I see reference to day blocking, the Play-Doh idea from Flavian that came up over the lunch session, the day blocking that came up in the session on 25 tasks in 24 hours. 40% of tasks devoted to revenue generation. That's something Tanmoy alluded to in the 25 task session. Pia is referencing something Amanda talked about in the collaboration session that Ambreen just led. Several books came up over the course of the day. Someone noted here, and lots of stuff in the opening panel about revenue generation. Maybe I can turn to you, Krystal, as we reflect back on that first live session that you led about paid subscriptions. What's something that stood out to you, a notable moment or a comment or idea from that first session?
Well, first of all, I just love Priti's comment when people asked, when should you start monetizing? She said yesterday. And I really think that's important because, earning money is something creators need to think about more from the start. And the sooner you can do that, that'll help you do other things. It'll help you hire people or spend money on software, things that'll make your life a lot easier and set you up for success early on.
Yeah, I think that's a great point and a challenge that everyone faces, right? In terms of figuring out what is the right time. I'll be fully candid and say I'm reflecting on this exact question right now. It's a question about, what is free, how much is free, when do you switch from being free? And there's no right answer that applies to everyone, in my view. I think different contexts mean different, different needs that people have or different timing that makes sense. And it's also, the market is changing so quickly. If are we moving into a massive recession? If so, how does that affect the game for individual creators and their readers in terms of the readers' budgets? Are we moving into a world where, advertisers shift their dollars more towards individual creators, and that opens up a different kind of opportunity? The platforms are continually creating all sorts of new features and capabilities, right? Substack has been developing several new monetization features that are soon to launch, and that also affects the game for decisions about charging and not charging. So, Ambreen, from your session that you just came off of, the collaboration one, what's something that was kind of notable or interesting in your view, a particular comment or idea that came up that you want to share out?
I think I really liked how I think Amanda and Jay both said, to trust your gut when it comes to deciding who's a good partner and whether a collaboration is going to work. I think there is kind of only so many worksheets and quantitative things you can lean on when you're talking about working with others. And it's more about is this a fit? And how they talked about many of the people they collaborate with were people that they were fans of first, or that they followed for a long time, or that they started small. I think there was a lot of really great advice like that. But I think my favorite thing that they all said was that it's not a competition. The internet is so vast. And if you want to be a successful creator, you have to work in partnership with others, because how else will you amplify what you do, especially when you're just a solo creator? And so just kind of getting out of that traditional competition mindset that a lot of us have as journalists, especially if you work in big media newsrooms, just sort of realizing the people who maybe cover the same space you do are not necessarily your competitors. They might be your partners.
Yeah, I love that point that came up in that conversation about, it's no longer Good Morning America versus the Today Show, right? It's no longer Time Magazine versus Newsweek. That's the old paradigm. That's what we grew up, in some cases, some of us thinking that, there's one against the other, and it's now this marketplace of thousands of different alternatives in whatever category it is. And it's less about people picking one versus the other and more about sort of finding what you have to say or offer that resonates with some particular subgroup of people, right? And that actually ties into one of the points that Kyle just pasted in terms of the takeaways from that first session, this idea from JR, Raphael, basically this idea that if people really know you and like you and or what you do resonates with them in some way, you develop this relationship, right? And that's going to lead down the path of some sort of connection, right? Which can lead to revenue, which can lead to sustainability, right? And I liked in that first panel this notion that it's a pathway. You walk, one step at a time, right? JR talked about you kind of create something that's useful for people. It's free. They can join it. They can check it out if it resonates with them. You may eventually offer them something else that might even be more useful for them, and there may be a fee associated with that. And that's sort of the the path to revenue through value, like through creating something that's useful for someone. And then they can support it either because they support you, right? Priti alluded to this too in that first panel. Like it might be because they just support you and they like the work that you do, or it might be, you know, in JR's case, it might be a more practical, you know, kind of transaction where they really want a particular thing that you're offering, right? And one of the things I like in your case study, Krystal, one of your case studies is that list of perks, right? The benefits, because sometimes it is something tangible, right? It's not just, I want to support you because I like you. It's also sometimes, you know, I really appreciate that you post this extra thing about whatever, or I really appreciate that you have these live meetings, or that you have this bonus material, or whatever it is. So all of those things can be reasons for different, you know, for different kinds of supporters. As you were writing the case studies, maybe we can talk about that this for a minute in terms of the case studies, because there's so much more in the case studies than we can convey in one live session. And both of you did an amazing job of speaking to so many different creators. What are the couple of things in that process of gathering all these insights that intrigued you, or maybe that surprised you along the way in some of those conversations that you had with so many different creators, something that was a little bit counterintuitive or that you hadn't expected to hear from people? Because I know sometimes those conventional bits of wisdom are in there, but then sometimes there are those surprises, those pieces of unconventional wisdom or counterintuitive wisdom. Yeah, Krystal.
Two counterintuitive things were, you know, make your best content free, because, you know, the conventional wisdom might be, oh, I have to keep all the good stuff for the people who are willing to pay. But that's really how you create that base to convert people to become paying subscribers. And the other thing Pam said, when they're interviewing podcasters, a few other people hit on this point too, Amanda Kwa, was like, really listen to those first 5 paid subscribers, people who are your followers, and you'll get a lot of helpful information from them. And they're also like the most passionate people who will tell other people about you and help you build that base at the beginning. Yeah.
That's great. Yeah, the first 5 is a great rule of thumb. You know, sometimes I think people get overwhelmed because they think, oh my gosh, I have to do a statistically significant survey and I need 160 responses. And, you know, I'm going to analyze those. And actually, you know, sometimes speaking to a handful of people, right, starts to give you some insight in terms of what their interests are, what their media diet is like, what their needs are, et cetera. Ambreen, what about you? What's something a little bit counterintuitive or surprising that came up along the way?
I think my favorite kind of nugget that challenged me a bit was from Jay Klaus when we were talking about managing work-life balance and burning out. And he said that for him, like the optimal is like right below wherever burnout is. And I feel like, you know, we're always talking about taking breaks and like being easy on ourselves. And those are very, very, very important things. But I thought about that a lot, and I kind of like it because I think that his point is like, especially for him, you know, where he is in life right now, he has the ability to kind of prioritize work, and he's really trying to build something. And so he is pushing himself to work as hard as he can without burning out, you know, like sort of like, as he said, like he's on the red line all the time. And I like that a lot. Another kind of fun piece of advice I got was, from Hannah Raskin, who is a food writer. And she said that her husband makes her a drink at the same time every evening. I think it was 7 o'clock. And that is her hard stop. You know, she is not going to, she's going to have that drink and she's not going to work after she drinks. So that tells her like, get off the computer, and she works all day. So she like logs on at 8. She doesn't even take breaks. But then at 7 o'clock, she gets up, she puts it all away. And I think kind of both of those speak to, you know, it's just so hard when you're working on your own thing to like manage your time and to give yourself a break. And so knowing when to walk away, but also maybe like really pushing yourself to try and achieve.
Yeah, that's a great moment. And in that case study, that really caught me. The first time I saw that, I thought, wow, that's a really bold and unique thing that Hannah had to say about that. Yeah, and the idea of pushing it up all the way to the red line from Jay, you know, the line before burnout, I think that's a controversial view. And I think a lot of people, including Tanmoy and Pam, if I could guess, based on the conversation we had earlier today, might question that, whether that's really the healthiest thing in the long run, right? And you know, it takes me back to a session we had with Sarah Fisher of Axios, who came to visit a class. This was back when we were in person, and Sarah came and talked about how she would stay up all night to finish her newsletter. And I was taken aback and surprised, because that was a commitment beyond what I'd seen from a lot of others, and some of the students, participants in that class at the time, really resisted that, right, and responded with concern about that, and sort of suggested, you know what, that's not really what we should be doing, and we had a healthy debate about you know, what are the limits we should set for ourselves. And I think that's a really important discussion and set of considerations for people who are building their own things, because on the one hand, if you really are serious, you have to put in a lot of work, right? There's no way around that, really. If you want to create something distinct and valuable in a world that's already full of clutter and plenty of content, if you're going to stand out, it's going to be hard. You're going to have to do something. You're going to put a lot of yourself into it, and that's going to include a lot of time and effort, and it's going to include trade-offs, right? That's just the truth. And probably, you know, whatever field you're in, but it's certainly in this field where you are working independently quite a bit. On the other hand, if you want to do it over a long period of time, and you continue to burn the candle at both ends, or whatever the expression is, eventually you'll, you know, burn yourself to the quick, and then you'll have nothing left to offer. So it's obviously it's somewhere in the middle, right? Ambreen,
and I will say that, you know, I have 3 kids, so I cannot operate at the red line, because they're going to burn me out, and then that's not going to work. But as Jay said, like, you know, he doesn't have kids yet. He sort of, it makes sense in his life to be at that point. And I think that that's really kind of the key caveat. It kind of reminds me a little bit of lean in, you know, like that concept, like when you have the time, put in the work. I'm not endorsing that. I'm just kind of putting it out as like an interesting nugget I got. And I want to mention one more person in that life balance case study, Jane Ratcliffe, who writes this great Substack newsletter called Beyond, which is an interview newsletter. And she actually doesn't work at all during the traditional 9-to-5 workday, because she's got all these other priorities. You know, she's got a dog she likes to go on long walks with. She has some health issues that require going to, you know, get care. So she works after dinner, and then kind of basically up until bedtime. And I think when I talk to all these different creators, I just realized, like, one of the great benefits of having your own thing, and Krystal, you could probably talk about this even from your own perspective at Planet Princeton and your other work, but it's like the whole point is that you're now in charge. And so, like, you take that, and like, you don't have to work by the regular confines of a 9-to-5 job. You don't have to show up to an office. Do it your way, do it the way that makes sense for your life.
Right. But you can be a slave to yourself. I mean, Planet Princeton, my attitude when things grew was just to work harder and harder. And pretty soon there aren't enough hours in the day. And what I realized eventually was that, you know, and all studies bear this out, that you're not as productive. Like, you might feel like you're getting more done working 70 hours a week or more, but actually you've really reduced your productivity, your brain, your body, you know. So I learned if I take more breaks and rest, then I'm much more effective when I do work. So.
Yeah, and you alluded to this notion of taking breaks and sort of having a family to manage, and you know, this idea of cycles in our lives, right? Periods in our lives, right? When you have young kids or when you don't have young kids, Ambreen, as you were talking about, and that takes us back to that second panel with Tanmoy, and Kyle just shared some takeaways from that with Tanmoy and Pam, and this notion of cycles in various different ways. And this also came up in the lunch session at 1 p.m. Eastern, where we're talking about cycles at different levels, right? The cycle of the individual day, right? And in Pam's case, she talked about day blocking, which is something that resonated with a couple of people in the takeaways here in the chat. This idea that we take a whole day. In Pam's case, Thursday is recording day, as she described it, right? Monday is sharing day, social media day, and recording videos for sharing and so forth. So sort of thinking of things in terms of days, because that's the way her energy works, right? Or that's the way her efficient sort of system works. And then in the lunch session, someone talked about a different phase in their career, right? And you know, one phase of your career, you might be focusing on this, and then you're you know, moving off and doing your own thing, right? If you're working part of a team or a company. And Pam also talked about in that second session, you know, the 2 weeks, and she was very candid and blunt about this, right? The 2 weeks where she feels she's able to be more productive, and 2 weeks where there's a little bit less productivity in her, at least in the traditional way that people think of that. So those cycles, I think, are something interesting for me as a takeaway or a way of thinking about things. And then just limiting. I think that was a big theme for me in the second session, limiting the number of tasks that we're aiming to do, limiting the extent to which we define ourselves by our task and productivity, and the processes that we follow. Krystal, jump in.
Knowing when to say no to people, I think that's really hard for a lot of us, and Tanmoy discussed that, and it also came up in collaboration. I think that's really important.
And somebody posted, "No, we're in November," right? Which I thought was cute. I hadn't seen that before. And so moving on in the day, we spoke a little bit about in the lunch session, the middle session, the short session. We heard from Flavian, who had a great tactic I'd never heard before, which I don't know if it's familiar to other people. Apparently this was at the INN. He presented at the INN conference, the sustainability conference recently, which I know you were at, Krystal, which was a great concept to me, about this idea of embodying our accomplishment in a creative way, making a Play-Doh ball of a different color for each time we accomplish something, right? And having that physical, I'm sorry if I'm butchering the tactic here, but this is my understanding of it. Making physical something that we've done, so we can see that we've actually, finished something, and do it in a creative way. And it combines a few different things. It combines, putting something physical into our physical space, as well as, acknowledging the fact that we're doing something, even if it seems, evanescent or whatever. It seems like it's just a tweet or just a post that's going out into ether. And it also adds a little bit of creativity. Somebody talked about that as a technique for getting unstuck too. Joe talked about using generative AI to get unstuck. Other people talked about, creating something or collaborating or going to a conference. Those are all ways of getting unstuck. But I loved Flavian's very specific tactics. So I'm gonna, next time you see this office, you might see, some Play-Doh containers or little balls of different colors. You'll know what that is. Other takeaways. We're down to our last few minutes here. Other takeaways from the day we haven't touched upon, or anything else you want to add as an insight from one of the cases? Yeah, Krystal.
I would just add two things. First of all, the importance of understanding your workflow, which that's in our podcast case study, but I think it applies to newsletter creators as well, or niche website creators. It's not like sexy, right? But that nuts and bolts part of understanding, like, these are all the tasks I do each week or day. This is how much time they take. I think it's really important to be conscious about that and think through those things and ways you might make things easier with automation or different apps. And then my other big takeaway from all of the cases and from what people have said today is really the importance of experimenting and trying things. I think often we don't want to try things because we don't want to fail, but doing little tests or just, like whether it's changing your messaging for asking for people to become paying subscribers, or your schedule, or like the text of your welcome emails, or the formatting of your newsletter. Like, try new things and see what happens, and that's how you get feedback from your readers or listeners, and that's how you can adapt and do better, I think.
Yeah, I love that. And I think, like, just a takeaway for folks that are, either considering launching something or have something that's related to that, is just sort of to try one thing that you heard about today. The collaboration panel, several of the panelists talked about how they go on Twitter and just kind of try to engage somebody they're a fan of, that they might see a potential collaboration with down the road. So it's not necessarily like get that person on the phone and set up a collaboration, but why don't you just reach out to them, or like retweet something that they have said, like to start taking the initial steps to kind of engage them and put yourself on their radar. I think a little step like that is something you can easily kind of like get going. And then before you know it, you're kind of like well into the path of putting something together. I know from the first panel, Krystal, that you moderated, I took some notes, and I really liked some of the advice about finding your own voice and like not going to that, like as journalists, we write in that sort of AP style, news style. And I thought to myself, okay, I'm going to try to like be more in conversation. And Alicia had mentioned that she, for her paid newsletters, like it's a more intimate conversation because these are the people that are really engaged. And I love that. I think it's a great idea. So that's something I'm going to try to out with my own newsletter. So just kind of think about, you know, what's one thing you heard today that maybe in the next week you could actually try out.
I think that's a great note to sound. Yeah, I think, you know, I've been to a ton of conferences. I'm sure many in this room have been to many conferences. I think one of the most important things I've learned after having come back and forgotten or moved on from things too quickly is the most important lesson I've learned, I guess, is to take some portion of time, even if it's 15 minutes or half an hour, within a short amount of time after a conference has ended, before the rest of the stuff flows back in, to kind of digest a couple things. And so I do want to invite people in a moment just to share, you know, for themselves mainly, some specific thing that you're going to do next. We talked about general next steps in that poll, but be great to identify something in particular in the chat that you intend to do, somebody you want to follow up with, something you want to read, something you want to listen to, something you want to try creating or experimenting with. We heard in that second session, by the way, about many different tools, for example, and you'll see more of those in the case study. There are various tools to experiment with. Pam talked about Descript and Notion, for example, as tools that she's found really helpful in her workflow. And there are many others in your case studies, which are full. I just want to reiterate this. They're full of so many great things. I want to just congratulate you both on this. This is an example of one of the pages talking about the tech stack to help with life balance, right? By outsourcing in some cases. Pam talked about automate or hire, right? Or create routines, right? And there's just so many different. Here's an insight from Hannah, who came up earlier in the conversation, from the writes the food section, taking the Mr. Rogers approach to time structure that you alluded to, Ambreen. So there's just so much in these case studies, and I just want to thank you both again for the work you did on these, and everyone who put time and effort into these and poured a lot of heart into them. Kirsty for designing them, Kyle and Sarah for this summit, helping make sure this happened well and efficiently and effectively, and that the case studies came together in the end well. Thanks also to Marie for leading the J+ team, to Anita for helping create the J+ team overall and lead it, to Graciela for leading the school, the journalism school, and allowing us to do so many different things and experimenting, as you describe it, you know, Krystal, experimentation. We get to experiment with things at the school to try to create new programs in an academic environment, which could be very old-fashioned, but actually, you know, allows us to be really progressive and try new things in new ways, including a fully online program, right? Who would have thought of that a couple of years ago before the pandemic? The EJCP program. So thank you to everyone at the school who has allowed us to do that, and to everyone else on the team who's worked on this. And thank you to everyone who participated today. I know they're not necessarily here in the room, but there's so many panelists for all of these sessions, and they give time to prep and to meet ahead of time and to prepare their thoughts and share their thoughts and be interviewed and all that stuff. So it's appreciated. And thank you all for coming and caring enough about this topic to actually invest time in being here and listening and learning and sharing and talking. All of that is what makes a session or a series of sessions interesting and helpful, hopefully. And thank you for being here for that. The links are all available to you. Everything is public and it's free for anyone and for everyone. Please share them. Help other people by helping them see that there's some resources that can be useful. So thank you. This is the end of our day. I welcome your outreach. If you have ideas for next things we should do, or you want to collaborate on something, email us, follow us, read the case studies, and give us feedback. Thanks to everyone, and have a fantastic rest of your Friday. Go have a drink like Hannah does, or do whatever you do to recharge or refresh, and enjoy the weekend ahead of you. And hopefully you'll join us again next time, or whenever it is that you're next engaging with the school. So thanks, everyone. Have a great rest of your Friday.